Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thoughts and Coffee. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I'm the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, the Blended Podcast, and the founder of the Blended Pledge. And I'm super excited to be here with you today. We've got a great show. We're going to be talking to Richard from Infios about all things cargo theft, but also how your supply chains should be thinking, maybe not for you, but with you. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on in the episode. So I want to give a shout out to our show sponsor, Secret Society of Supply Chain. If you haven't headed over there, check it out. We've got a free membership group. We've got our Women in Supply Chains connections over there as well. And you can find out all that information at secretsocietyofsupplychain.com. We want to give a shout out to some of our newest members. So we've got Mike DeAngelis, we've got Richard Pinheiro, we've got Tornia Carolina, and Aaron Turner. And then for our Woman in Supply Chains connections, we've got Catherine Etchevers, and I hope that I did not botch that. So my apologies in advance if I did, but welcome to the Secret Society of Supply Chain. We are super excited to have you. All right, let's get into what is happening at Let's Talk Supply Chain. So we've got 2 brand new episodes for you this week. That's right. We are closing out 2025 strong. I think we've got a couple of episodes for you every single week leading up to the holidays. Now, episode 504, they were recently on Thoughts and Coffee. It's Ion, and they were talking about their report and how they surveyed a lot of supply chain executives to talk about best-in-class transformation. What does it mean for them? What are they questioning? What are they investing in? And we dove more into that report on this particular episode. So highly recommend you go and check that out. That is anywhere that you listen or watch the show, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. And then we've got episode 505. Now, this was on site at IANA back in September. And they've got a couple of really big announcements that we go into. We dive a little bit deeper into those so that you can understand what it means for you and how it can help you and your supply chains. So go and check that out. Episode 505, again, Apple, Spotify, and head over to YouTube as well. All right. We've got some upcoming events that I want to share with you. Obviously, we've got Manifest coming up in February. And right after this, I'm going to tell you a bit about an announcement and something very cool that we're doing at Manifest. If you are a shipper and you haven't been to Manifest, I'm talking to a lot of people who are going to be attending Manifest this year. They want to go and check out all of the technology that's going to be there, all in one room. So you can go and check it out, see who's on the market, see how they can help you, see which ones are there to be able to help you solve your supply chain challenges. So February 9th through 11th in Vegas. I hope we're going to see you there. I am recording some podcasts on site, so that's really exciting. And here's the news. So we've just launched the Supply Chain Masters of Innovation Award alongside Supply Chain Brain. And this is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have the top 3 winners. So we've already had the nominations. We've gone through, we've picked our top 3, which I cannot announce just yet, but they're going to be presenting their supply chain innovations at Manifest on Tuesday at 12:30. So if you're looking at your agenda, make sure to mark that down because we've got some really, really hot brands in the industry who are going to be sharing that with you on that day. And then we're going to be presenting the award on the main stage actually Wednesday morning as well. So can't wait to see you there. If you don't have your ticket for Manifest, make sure to grab it. And again, we want to hear from you as to where you are tuning in from. So put that in the comments. I see you, Frank. I see you, Leah. And then if you love the conversation today, we love a good fire emoji here at Let's Talk Supply Chain. So make sure to put that in the comment. All right, now it's time to bring up our guest for today, Richard. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
It's a little early for you, so I just want to acknowledge and appreciate you for being on your first cup of coffee and joining us for the fastest 30 minutes in supply chain.
I am caffeinated and ready to go. I appreciate it.
Love that. So for anyone who doesn't know who you are, why don't you tell everybody who you are, what you do, and a little bit about Infios?
Yeah, absolutely. Richard Stewart. I head up product and industry strategy at Infios. For my job, I like to say it's a great job. I get to work with customers and our teams to really help shape the future of intelligent supply chain execution. In terms of Infios, we are laser focused on supply chain execution. We bring together order management, transportation management, warehouse management, fueled with AI. So companies, we can help them with that journey going from kind of reactive manual operations to truly connected intelligent execution, which I know we'll talk about today. And it's a fun spot to be in because we're starting from a great foundation as Infios. We got a chance to bring together companies that customers know and love. So High Jump Software, Gerber Supply Chain, Mercury Gate, and Conso. And I say it's an amazing opportunity because we have the ability, we can continue to make those individual solutions better each and every day, but then also, more importantly, we get a chance to unlock that value that they can deliver when they start to work together and think together and really move into connected execution.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that because I knew that you had brought together some of the biggest brands in supply chain to really bring that solution to supply chain leaders, professionals, teams that are out there. And so I'm glad that you mentioned all of that because I'm not sure if everybody knows. And I know that we're going to be working together and dissecting that a little bit more through some podcast episodes and things like that. So super excited to do that and excited to have you on the show. We're going to be talking about how to work smarter, not harder, which I think everybody wants right now. But we're also going to talk about what disruption actually means. I mean, we hear that word all the time. Everybody's like, it's kind of the new normal. We've got disruptions all over the place. How do we manage that? How do we manage our supply chains through disruptions? How do we manage our teams through disruptions? Because obviously we don't want burnout. And so we do have to start thinking better. We need to start working smarter. And you and I are going to talk about that in just a little bit. Now, we do have a QR code up in the right-hand corner throughout this show. If you want to find out more about Infios, click that. It'll take you straight to their website and you can find out more. All right, let's get to the poll of the week. So we ask everybody on our LinkedIn a question every single Wednesday. And the question that we asked, how would you describe the interoperability of your supply chain tech stack today? This is such an important question. Now, I know we only had about 13 votes, but this really shows how this stacks up. And I want to ask you, Richard, like, why was this question so important? I know in my mind why it's important, but I want to hear from you as to why we wanted to ask the audience this question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. First of all, I would say thank you to your followers for being quite frankly honest. Like, I think those statistics that you see there are somewhat representative of what we see in the industry today. But from what I've seen, the reason I think this question is so important because I think, a lot of companies are starting to hit a little bit of a plateau, right? Because they've spent all that time working on making the individual silos work really, really well. Like we built our organizations this way, right? There's the transportation department, the warehousing department, the order management department, the planning department. Not only have we structured the departments, but then we structure incentives, we structure their measurements, right? And so they start to solve that problem in their individual silos. And then if you think about what is that next step to get off that plateau, you got to get people, you got to get systems starting to talk together. So that's why, this question I think is really resonating with the industry today.
Yeah. Well, and we created tech that does that too, right? And I think, the results of how many people answered this question are the results of how many people really truly understand what this means for their supply chain. I think the reason that we had 13 votes was the fact that people don't actually understand necessarily their tech stack and what it means for them and what it means for the future of their supply chains. And so I wanted to point that out because I feel like people don't answer polls when they just don't know their answer. But I'm hoping what it did was it had them go back to their teams and ask the right questions around this. And so 54% said effective, but still siloed. And then we had a tie at 23% each, integrated yet lack scale, and agile and integrates with AI. So was this surprising to you? What do these results technically mean?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say it's surprising. I mean, I'm interested, would love to talk to the 25% that said they've already got the AI, because I think that's where the fun stuff is. A lot of the stories of how they're working with that. For the other subset, I would say, it's probably representative of the folks that you're siloed, you run it into all kinds of things, and you start to take those initial steps. You're looking for where I can start to connect my different systems. So not surprised in the least. I think it's very representative kind of where folks are in the market today. And as they're staring on what the future looks like, how do they get off that plateau of kind of those siloed systems?
Well, and how far I think we need to go in our conversations around tech stacks and what systems are we using and how are they helping and how are they talking to each other, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So now's the time of the show that I usually ask you for a bit of a market update. I mean, you're talking to customers all the time. What is top of mind? What are they thinking about right now in Q4? But then what are they thinking about for 2026 going into the new year? What's the sentiment? What's keeping them up at night? Share all the tea.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting year because usually this time of year, there's one word and that's peak, right? Everybody's just worried about peak. But I would say this year's a little bit different. Like you mentioned it to open the show, like disruption is everything. And here a lot of people talk about it's not, it is just the new norm because it's true. We've shifted from it used to be there was a disruption. How do we prevent the disruption from happening again? And we've really shifted now to, hey, it is what it is. You need to start dealing with and how do you adapt and react to disruption as it comes through. You think through all the buzzwords of this year, right? It's all about tariffs. It's supply and labor shortages. I would say for me, though, the fun one to talk about is AI because it's the biggest buzzword, right? Like we get distracted every once in a while, but that is the theme of 2025. And it's interesting because everybody, I'm going to say out there, I'll say companies are scared when it comes to AI because it's a disruption in itself. It's a technology disruption. And I would say that they're scared because they're worried about what everybody else is doing and whether they're going to get left behind. And so we've got customers that I'll talk to that they've even got budget of, I'm supposed to go out and do this thing and start our AI strategy, but frankly, they just don't know where to start. And so a lot of our conversations with our customers are really like, we love technology, we're a technology shop, but you really need to focus on the problem. And so we actually brought on a new head of AI earlier this year. And first 90 days was just go talk to customers, sit down and get them talking about what's keeping them up at night. What are the problems they're facing? Don't talk about technology until we actually figure out what the problems are. Then look to say, hey, is this something you can solve with what you have today? And look for the little nuggets of that is a practical use case that we can define, not just how AI would help solve that for you, but also how are you going to measure success? Because you read a lot of those articles that talk about how, I'll forget the stat, it was like high 80s or low 90s percentage of AI projects that are failing today. And it was interesting because I think a lot of people, if you don't start with how you're going to measure your success, how do you know when you're successful? And so that's why I think it's really important as we talk through is just, you got to focus on what the problem is. You got to focus on how you're going to measure it. And so it's been fun though. Like we've got some really great practical use cases that kind of span the gauntlet. We've got on one end, just simple, using AI for helping with data entry and order ingestion or automating kind of call checks in the transportation world. So, finding out what is the updated ETA of when somebody's going to show up.
Yeah.
All the way to the other side in the warehousing world is, my favorite one is working with, I always say there's the inventory rep in every single warehouse. There's always that inventory agent. I always say they're surrounded by boxes and troubles, and they're the ones with sticky notes all over their shirt. Like we're working on something with customers to actually make their life a little bit easier. Like how do you use AI to kind of augment their day so that instead of having to navigate a million screens, they can simply just ask what is wrong with this particular box, what is wrong with this particular order, and it starts to jump in. And crystal ball, I think we're going to continue to see that as we go into 2026. AI is not going away anytime soon. I think you'll probably just see a general trend from kind of that excitement curve to, okay, now how do we measure it? How do we make sure that the investments are actually giving us real ROI and real payback?
Yeah, I love that you're asking what does success look like for you. I've been starting to ask that question too, because you really got to understand what that measurement is and what everybody's working towards. Because if you don't, it gets a little bit messy. But also, like you said, there's a lot of investment out there. They've been told to go and spend money on some of this technology and these platforms. I think also some of the hesitation is they don't want to make the wrong decision. And so that's coming into play a lot. But when you said that you went out and got ahead of AI, I thought you were going to say we recruited ahead of problems. I thought you were going to say that, and then you went, no, we recruited a head of AI. I was like, oh, okay, that makes way more
sense. I'll have to talk to Adil and say, hey, would you be willing to change your job title, head of problems?
All right, let's get to our first article. Now, this one came from FreightWaves, and it talks about cargo theft. Now, we wanted to talk about this because this article is fairly interesting. There was a couple of key points that I wanted to mention on this. Q3 saw an uptick to 29%. I think it was 6% above what that was in Q2. California and Texas are the hot spots, and food and electronics are the highest. Now, what they were talking about, which I thought was interesting, is that they mentioned tariffs as part of the spike. So not only holiday season, which is normal, but the tariffs as a part of the spikes, because the tariffs have driven price increases in some of these categories. And so it makes these products easier to resell. Richard, what did you think of this article?
It was a fun read, and not something you think about every single day, but I don't know on I understand criminals are getting very, very sophisticated. Whether they're starting to target based on tariffs, that was almost a little bit scary if they're that sophisticated. But I think for me, reading through the article, there was a couple of things that jumped out. One, to your point, traditionally, like this is the time of year where everybody is stretched so thin. Like we're maybe taking shortcuts in our processes. We're maybe using carriers we're not used to using. So this is the time of year where, you are going to be a little bit more susceptible. The other thing that jumped out is the reference to food, like food and electronics. Like we've got two recent stories with customers. One was, they lost an entire load of Red Bull. And I'm just like,
what?
But you think like, why would anybody do that? But, price per can. And then you think about how many cans you can get on a 53-foot trailer. That adds up. And then the other story that you talk about how criminals are getting more sophisticated, and it's really becoming like we had one customer was loaded TVs that they were shipping to a retailer, so in that electronics portion. But instead of, once they faked the documentation, got the pickup, instead of just outright stealing the load, they went and dropped 70% of the load off at a fake warehouse that they had set up, and then proceeded to the retailer, dropped off the other 30% with fake bills of lading, full 9 yards, and then exited stage right, shut down the other warehouse. It's just the level of sophistication. It's almost becoming a technology race between the suppliers and the criminals.
Well, and I think this is a good spot to talk about how we are still siloed and how they're taking advantage of that. Because there's so many different people within the supply chain that's going to be involved in something like that. So you're talking about 30% actually making it to the customer warehouse. Well, those on the dock, if they're getting a fake bill of lading, they don't actually know that they're missing anything until potentially it's getting put into the system. And that could be 24 hours later, potentially, depending on what happens that day, or if they've got a peak within the warehouse and they get a little bit busy, whatever that looks like. But if we still stay siloed, they're going to be able to take advantage of that, I think.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's the paper handoff, right? If there's actually an electronic ASN that would have showed up ahead of time, those are much more difficult to fake than an actual printed bill of lading. So 100%, I think if you look at those handoff points, whether it's the appointment scheduling, the quoting and tendering, I show up and I'm checking in for my appointment, it's those seams between the different systems that folks can definitely take advantage of.
Yeah. Scary thought, but it actually means that we need to take a look at those investments sooner because we need to make sure that we're no longer siloed so that they can't take advantage of that. All right, let's get to our second article. Now, this is an article that you wrote, and so I want to spend a little bit of time on this because I love this. Now, you're talking about how supply chains need to think, not just work. And it's really the case around connected supply chain execution. One of the takeaways that I took from this article was that disruption chips away at performance, increased cost, and delayed shipments, which actually increases all of your risks in all of those categories as well. And I think it's interesting because, like I said earlier, we talk about disruption all the time, but we don't really break it down as to where disruptions really take effect and where we see the most impact. And so you had mentioned performance, increased cost, and delayed shipping. So talk to me about this. Why is this so important? What can people get out of this article? Because of course we want to send people there so they can read more about it.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think a lot of it comes back to what we were talking a little bit about earlier in terms of the connected execution. But if you think through, there's always that, start working smarter, not working harder. And I think we have spent the last couple of decades really focusing on working harder, working faster, whether it's in transportation, cutting cost out of the overall transportation spend. If in the warehouse, it's always been, how do you make the picker work a little bit faster, trim some of those milliseconds off. Order management is always, how do you make sure you're shipping it from the right spot? And I think we're now starting to see a shift of, now that disruption has truly become the new norm, how do you start to get ahead of that? Because it's just going to throw curveballs at you. So, great example, if you think through like an ETA, like a load's coming inbound and it's going to be late, visibility and execution of that was great, I know, but now the reality is the dock scheduler has something that's not going to be in that door at 8:30 this morning. It's not going to be there till 11:30. So that labor that's all geared up to unload as fast as humanly possible really can't do anything. And so when you start to think through how do they start to work smarter, well, when you bring those systems together, so that transportation manager says, hey, this is going to be late. Warehouse management instantly gets updated. Your appointment schedule goes red. You automatically start to think through, how do I get something else into that door that's available so that I can keep that labor working at the right pace. And then you fast forward even further and say, okay, now that's going to be 3 hours late.
Right.
Order management, if you had something that was dependent on that inventory getting put away for the cycle time, you might need to think about, how do you reallocate to a different distribution center or to a different store? So a lot of it is just really starting to bring together, not just, starting to think and react and adapt within your individual silos, but also think about the advantage you have if you start with the phone a friend, where you can start talking across those different silos to truly start to solve the problem of all of the things that could be affected upstream, all of those elements of cost, of risk, of ultimately a broken promise to your consumer.
Well, and I'm so glad you said broken promise to the consumer, because really at the end of the day, it's a domino effect. And a lot of times that consumer is the one that does not get it. They're kind of the end of the broken telephone, right? They don't get notified that things are going to get delayed. If a truck is delayed 3 hours and it's going to take time to offload it, and that brings us to the end of the day, and your carrier's already been in, your courier, right, has already been in to pick up packages to be able to deliver the next day, it means that theirs is most likely pushed off at least one more day. And so you want to be able to tell your customer that that is happening, because that's how you build trust. That's how you build respect in the market, is with those little nuggets and reinforcing that every single time. It's not the fact that you're letting them down because there's a delay. Listen, delays happen, and most people understand that. It's the fact that you are able, through breaking down these silos, to be able to take that information and make sure everybody has it, and it doesn't just stop in one spot.
100%. You think through, like, a lot of it is just shifting into a proactive mindset, right? Like, everybody kind of knows nowadays what time their UPS or FedEx truck shows up. If I know ahead of time that there's not going to be something on that truck that I need to wait around for, I'm a little less mad as a consumer, because today's consumers
right
forgiving. So if you know that you shouldn't expect that, you can kind of get used to that. You appreciate your vendor or your supplier reaching out, etc. 100% agree. Like, just getting ahead of it and just learning to deal with that disruption is definitely what folks should be looking at.
Yeah, I'm going to give an example, and I know this isn't technically supply chain or what we talk about, but rental cars. We had an interesting, I think it was Friday morning, we had rented a certain car, for 9 a.m. And we get there and they're like, we don't have one. And so they start calling. They're like calling this person and calling that person. Oh, it's not going to get here till 11 or 12 o'clock. And we were like, well, we can't wait. We need to get on the road because we need to be somewhere at a certain time. And so that was a really great example of the fact that they were kind of siloed. They didn't have the right technology to be able to just go into a system and say, hey, this is coming at this time. I know it's not ideal. We have one down the road. Just go and pick it up. They couldn't even tell us that. They were like, you can go to the airport. We're like, that's going to take another hour and a half. We may as well just wait for the 11 o'clock. But that is a different example of when logistics in rental cars doesn't work out when you don't have the right technology and you can't bring everybody together.
That's a fantastic example, though. If you think through, like, if somebody wants to know, like, hey, this journey I want to go on, go look for those elements. Look to figure out where is the human, the glue, to try to figure out how to fix a problem. And that's where you should really focus in on how do I connect those two disparate technologies sometimes together to solve the problem faster.
Yeah. So giving a shout out to Budget and Avis, you might want to take a look at your tech. All right, let's get to our next article. So this particular article is talking about a global shipping report. And what this means is, as we're in Q4, taking a look at where we're at today as far as volumes. And volumes are actually up in 2025. And so there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of people trying to predict this year, trying to predict next year. And I think it's sort of all over the map. I mean, the fact that the shipping volumes are up is contrary to some of the things that we've heard from this year. And when I actually interviewed Noel from the Port of Long Beach, he was saying that they kind of expect it to be the same for 2026 as well. So it's a really interesting article around how volumes are up, what that means, even with tariff uncertainty, and also the impacts, like what to consider today for Q4, but then also taking a look at the impacts of all of this for 2026. What did you think about this article? What were the key takeaways that you think that people should walk away with this from?
Yeah, and it was an interesting article. I think, much to your point, I kind of gave me a little bit of hope. Overall, things are up year over year, so it wasn't quite as kind of doomsday. But I always say, like, if I'm a weather person, I want to be in San Diego, not in Seattle or Denver. If I'm a transportation analyst, I want to not be in 2025, right? Because it's been such a roller coaster. Like, you've got Liberation Day in April, kind of scares everybody to say, oh no, this is a thing, and then pause for 90 days. So everybody tries to buy as much as they can as fast as possible. And then, things fall off in August and September, but it's kind of understood. So it's been a crazy roller coaster. And I think, it's a little bit is going to become status quo, where I think overall the directional shift is probably still positive, but the peaks and the valleys that we're going to see are going to continue as, we wake up every day to something just a little bit different.
Yeah. I interviewed Paul Bingham at Inland back in, I think it was the end of September. And I asked him, I was like, so we spoke a year ago, almost today, and you predicted what was going to happen for 2025. How did that go? And he was like, oh, it was a complete disaster. And I was so wrong. So I asked him, I was like, do we want to do this again? Do you want to predict for 2026? He's like, sure. Because, even though I could be right on a few things, I could be wrong on a few things. And right now it's just very difficult to predict. And it's funny because I ask people to get their crystal ball out all the time, but really I shouldn't, because it's not fair.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, that was one part of that article. I think it did have a little bit of a tone of acceptance of this is the new reality. And then there was like a little bit of a guidebook to say, and here's some thoughts on how you might be able to deal with it.
Yeah, that was the part that I loved the most. So I would highly recommend that you go and check out that article, because near the end, like I said, it talks about the impacts for the near term, but then it also talks about the impacts for the long term. And so if you're trying to plan and think about, what 2026 can look like, where we're going to land as far as uncertainty or shipping volumes or demand, they at least give you a little bit of a roadmap that you can take a look at and try to predict where you want to be. I mean, at the end of the day, we can't take the risk out of any of the decisions that we're going to make. There's going to be a risk no matter what. It's really dependent on where you want to spend your risk dollars. Right? Which is the most riskiest solution for you, and maybe take the other one.
Yep. 100%.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Richard, for joining me for the show today. Thanks to everybody out there who tuned in to watch us on Thoughts and Coffee. I will be back again next week at 10 a.m. Eastern. So I can't wait to see you there. And I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving. Bye, everybody.